meaningful stories between nations. Through this, we reaffirm the connections between Korea and the rest of the world. Discover the hidden stories of Korean diplomacy. Home to table. In a time when few young people cook, some are turning to Korean recipes passed down from their parents' generation. A warm, home-cooked meal has the power to bring back forgotten moments shared with family. We introduce Korea's culinary culture through flavors and stories that connect generations. Welcome to Arirang land. Open to anyone seeking a first-hand experience of Arirang Studios and all its spaces. We closely follow those who are renting Arirang space for a day and see how their dreams unfold. We invite you to Arirang land, your stage to bring dreams and hopes to life.
The Korean wave is drawing more fans from all over the world. Local consumer prices continue to hover at the 2% census rate in April. Turning to robots to allow the visually impaired the chance to better indulge in cultural experiences. Like the number of hybrid cars are registered in South Korea has surpassed 2 million with this locally developed Yuri rocket. Arirang. It's June 3rd, 2nd here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour, starting with the final day of official campaigning ahead of Tuesday's presidential election. The Democratic Party's Lee Jae-myung is sticking around the capital area to woo voters, while the People Power Party's Kim Moon-soo will campaign across the country from Jeju Island up to Seoul. The Reform Party's Lee Jun-seok is finalizing his campaign trail in Daegu City. U.S. President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping will speak soon on trade issues, including a dispute over critical minerals, U.S. officials have confirmed. Trump, in the meantime, continues to pressure the courts that their possible ruling against his tariffs will ruin his country. At least 31 Palestinians were reportedly killed while trying to get aid in Gaza after claims that the Israeli forces opened fire on the crowd. The Israeli military and the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation denied the claims. In less than 24 hours from now, the people of South Korea head to polling stations to elect their 21st president. The Liberal camp's Lee Jae-myung will wrap up his 22-day official campaign period at Seoul's Yeouido Park, where he is expected to focus on the message of ending insurrection. Our correspondent, Shin-ayoung reports.
Ahead of Tuesday's election, Lee has embarked on a final day of campaigning. After holding rallies in Seoul and the surrounding metropolitan area on Monday, he will hold his last major rally this evening at Yeouido Park in western Seoul. Yeouido is home to the National Assembly, where a vote put an end to December's martial law saga. It's also where protesters spent a cold winter calling for the impeachment of former President Yoon Suk-yeol. Just like at the start of his campaign, he is expected to highlight his Revolution of Light message and emphasize his commitment to ending what he describes as insurrection. Meanwhile, he wrapped up his final weekend of campaigning with visits to the conservative-leaning southeastern region of the country, including Gyeongsangbuk-do Province, Daegu, Ulsan, and Busan. During his speech in Ulsan on Sunday, he emphasized the need for balanced regional growth.
South Korea must shift to balanced growth to keep developing. Busan, Ulsan, and Gyeongsangnam-do are hard to navigate without a car. Better infrastructure like transportation and targeted policies are needed to connect them.
He reiterated the significance of the upcoming election, emphasizing the need to end insurrection and hold those responsible accountable.
It's important to think about why this election is happening. It was triggered by an insurrection and is part of the effort to overcome it. On June 3rd, it will be decided whether the forces behind the insurrection return to power or are defeated.
He also urged voters to cast their ballots to exercise their sovereignty, saying that votes are more powerful than bullets. 신하영, Arirang News.
Now, for the conservative side, the People Power Party's Kim Moon-soo will travel across the country, literally. From the southernmost island to the capital, he's going to stop by 5 cities before the election period ends. Our Kim Do-yeon has more.
The People Power Party's Kim Moon-soo will cross the country on Monday to wrap up his presidential election campaign. On the final day of rallying, Kim will start in the southernmost island of Jeju before traveling north to Busan, Daegu, and Daejeon and holding his finale in the center of Seoul. The finale in front of Seoul City Hall has always been a popular finale spot for election campaigns, including Yoon Suk-yeol. But Kim didn't put any meaning into it.
Well, the last rally is usually at Seoul City Hall. That's why I wouldn't call it a special event. But Seoul is the center of the nation and has a lot of voters. That's probably why the camp choose to do it there.
With the finale being the biggest rally, as always, and the law permitting big events until 9 p.m., starting early evening, many key PPP figures are also set to appear on the stage to heat up the crowd. This includes other primary contestants who have shown support for Kim. As for his last rallies over the weekend, Kim toured Gangwon-do and Gyeongsang-buk-do provinces on Saturday, and on Sunday he chose the capital region. With the election coming to an end, Kim showed hope that since the beginning of the election there has been a turnaround and he's looking for an upset.
I've heard some surveys, but it's illegal to post them. I think the table has been turned already, and a big surprise ending is coming.
However, while the party believes it is gaining momentum, there were concerns for the camp, with impeached former President Yoon Suk-yeol relaying a message at a rally for a right-wing activist group saying everyone needs to support Kim. The party's interim chair, Kim Yong-tae, was quick to respond, saying that while Yoon left the party himself, he was practically kicked out. He also warned Yoon to stay away from the party. Kim Moon-soo also said Yoon is no longer part of the party, distancing himself from the impeached former president, as having such ties could make convincing undecided voters difficult. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
And a Reform Party candidate Lee Jun-suk will spend this last day of campaigning with young voters in the capital region and return to the conservative stronghold of Daegu City. Lee on Monday is scheduled to visit Korea Polytechnic University in Gyeonggi-do Province, where he'll join students for a meal at the school cafeteria, his final lunchtime outreach. Afterwards, he'll travel down to Gyeongsan, Gyeongsang-buk-do Province to meet students at Yeongnam University. His final rally will take place at Susang Lake in Daegu City. So we are now just a day away from the June 3rd presidential election, which will finally fill the country's months-long power vacuum. We have our political correspondent Oh Soo-young in studio to discuss how the race currently looks and what could determine its outcome. Welcome back, Soo-young.
Hi, Tammy. It's great to be here again.
So, Soo-young, let's start with the early voting that closed last Friday with quite a high turnout. Now, tell us more, and what might this indicate about this election race?
Right, so 15.4 million out of some 44 million eligible voters for this election, they cast their ballots early this time around. And this reached a figure of 34.74% for the turnout. And it wasn't a record-breaking figure as expected, as the numbers began lagging behind on the second day of voting. But it does still mark the second highest turnout for early voting voting in a nationwide election since the system was first introduced in 2014. Now that means over 1 in 3 people have already voted. And by region, the Honam area, traditionally a Democratic Party stronghold, once again recorded the highest turnout, surpassing 50%. And among them, Jeollanam-do province posted the highest early rate at 56.5%. In contrast, though, the lowest turnout was recorded in Daegu, which is, of course, a conservative People Power Party stronghold, and it recorded 25.63%, and that's down from 33.9% in the last presidential election in 2022. Another noteworthy point, early voting rates were lower than the national average in the Seoul capital area, which includes Incheon and Gyeonggi-do province. Now, these areas are considered swing voter strongholds with high proportions of undecided voters. Gyeonggi-do province in particular has the most voters, accounting for 26% of the population, followed by Seoul at 18.7% and Busan at 6.5%. So a high turnout in early voting in progressive regions of the country does indicate, I would say, a stronger leaning towards the Democratic Party candidate, as polls have also consistently shown. But conservative voters, they do have the tendency to cast their votes on the actual election day. And there are, of course, the undecided voters as well. So there's room to flip the race, though with a very small margin, I would say.
Indeed. And speaking of swing voters, you've mentioned it's the people in their 20s and 30s who are a major force in determining the election result.
Right, of course, we've discussed this before, and yes, it does really come down to the swing voter, especially in any election, I would say, with very established political factions. And in Korea's case, against the backdrop of strong regionalism seen over the decades, we're seeing a distinct generational differences emerge as a major factor. Now, people in their 40s and 50s, they tend to be left-leaning, while those in their 60s, 70s and over are traditionally conservative. So this, in recent years, has led to very tight races. Now, those aged 39 and under, though, they are, of course, significantly smaller, but increasingly they're becoming more significant as their numbers could impact the outcome, as they very much did in the last presidential election.
So the 20s and 30s crowd, they're not really, or they're less tied to any party or any region. So younger voters are done playing by political rules written even before they were born. So they couldn't care less about dusty political brands or who your political mentor was and those kind of stuff. So these young voters, they want real opportunities, real policies that actually make a difference to their lives.
For young voters, their biggest concerns are employment and social security. They want change to reform the overstretched national pension as well as health insurance system, which they're paying for but are unlikely to benefit from. They'd also like to see steps towards environmental sustainability and a vision for the country. Among the 20s and 30s age groups, there has been a growing number of those backing Reform Party candidate Lee Jun-seok. But of course, his support base is rather precarious, as 20 and 30-somethings tend to have a lower turnout and they're open to changing their minds about the candidate. Of course, Lee Jun-seok also faces some systematic limitations as well as a third-party candidate.
So Korea's presidential election is based on this system, so winner takes all, no runoffs, and that favors the big two parties, and that crushes anything in between. So South Korean voters tend to think, why waste my vote on someone who can't win? So they hold their noses and vote for the lesser evil. So compare that to, for example, New Zealand. So since adopting what we call mixed member proportional system in the 90s, the coalition politics has become the norm here.
Now, Seong, I do have to mention again, this is an unusual election as it's occurring 2 years ahead of the actual schedule after the former President Yoon Suk-yeol's impeachment, right?
That's right. So that means that the next president will take power within a day of after a clear winner is indicated by the polls, and that's likely to be the early hours of Wednesday. We can then expect to see an inauguration ceremony that day, and the next leader assuming his duties right away without a transition committee. So without having a transition committee that helps the new administration learn the ropes, the next government is really going to have to land running. And all three main candidates, they have indicated, though, that they'll first attend to economic matters first.
The first domestic priority must be fixing the economy for ordinary people, period. So whether it's Lee Jae-myung or someone else, there's no room for ceremonial waffle or something. Sky-high prices, unemployment, housing market shocks, and struggling small businesses. Younger people are frustrated about their economic situation. They're crushing the Korean public. So Korean people are not just frustrated, they're exhausted. So the new president must immediately start addressing those cost of living pressures and job market issues, especially for young people.
Well, polls will be open tomorrow on Tuesday from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. And of course, we'll be covering it throughout the day live. Thank you, Seong, for coming in today.
Thanks, Tammy. It's been fun covering this with you.
U.S. President Donald Trump is doubling down on tariffs as trade tensions with China escalate and court battles continue. A call with Chinese President Xi Jinping is expected soon, according to White House officials. Our Yeouido has the latest.
U.S. President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping are expected to speak soon on ongoing trade negotiations, according to White House Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. The anticipated phone talks come amid renewed tensions after Trump accused China of breaching a temporary agreement made last month in Geneva. That deal was aimed at easing trade tensions by mutually easing tariffs and trade restrictions. Bessent stressed that China is holding back its exports of rare earth minerals, which are critical for global industrial supply chains. Under the temporary truce, China reduced its tariffs on U.S. imports to 30%, down from the steep 145% level initially imposed in response to Trump's trade measures. Over the weekend, Trump took to his social media platform to say that if the courts somehow rule against the U.S. on tariffs, that would allow other countries to hold the U.S. hostage with their anti-American tariffs. His comments followed a Thursday decision by a federal appeals court to temporarily pause a lower court ruling that had invalidated most of his tariffs. Trump added this would mean the economic ruination of the United States of America. While Trump administration officials say they have other options for imposing tariffs should they ultimately lose the case, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick made it clear there will be no extension to the 90-day pause. In a Sunday interview with Fox News, Lutnick stated, "Rest assured, tariffs are not going away." On Friday, Trump announced he would double tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from 25% to 50%. Yeouido, Arirang News.
The outlook for the Korean economy from major domestic and international institutions is becoming increasingly bleak. More than 20 institutions are forecasting a growth rate under 1% this year, while the average growth rate forecast has fallen to 0.9% in just 4 weeks. France's Societe Generale even forecast 0.3% growth, less than half of the Bank of Korea's forecast of 0.8%. Now, according to the Bank of Korea on Monday, as of May 30th, the growth rate forecast for Korea this year from 41 domestic and international institutions ranges from 0.3% to 2.2%. Dozens were killed and over 100 others injured on Sunday when Israeli soldiers reportedly fired at Palestinians at a relief distribution site run by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. However, both the Israeli military and the foundation strongly deny the allegation. Lee Seung-ja has more.
Dozens of Palestinians were reportedly killed and over 100 others injured on Sunday with the Palestinian Civil Defense saying Israeli soldiers at a relief distribution center run by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation fired at people seeking food and aid. The AFP says 31 people were killed and over 176 injured in Rafah at a relief distribution site run by the United States and Israel. According to the spokesperson for the Civil Defense, Mahmoud Basal, Israel targeted thousands of civilians. Hamas also released a statement saying that Israel committed a terrible massacre targeting thousands of civilians heading to a distribution center. The Associated Press, citing a witness, said that at around 3 a.m., Israeli soldiers ordered the crowd to disperse and come back later. When a crowd began forming about 1 kilometer from the distribution site, they opened fire. Another witness said that at around 5 a.m., drones and tanks suddenly attacked the relief center, killing several people. However, the Israeli military dismissed the reports in a statement, saying that false reports have been circulating that raise serious suspicions that Israeli soldiers have fired on civilians near a humanitarian aid distribution site, calling it false. The Israeli military explained that no civilians were fired at inside or around the distribution center. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation also issued a press release saying that relief supplies were distributed safely and that Hamas is actively spreading rumors about casualties, which they call untrue and fabricated. The GHF announced that it distributed more than 15,000 boxes of relief supplies on Sunday and that more than 67,000 boxes have been distributed since the site opened last week. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
At a time when the world is facing myriad challenges, an international peace forum brought together pundits from around the world to Korea's Jeju island. Now, among the issues addressed was a possible U.S. troop drawdown from South Korea. Our foreign affairs correspondent, Bae Eun-ji, reports.
A potential troop reduction will not have a negative impact on the U.S. ability to meet treaty obligations to help South Korea defend itself against an attack from North Korea. That's according to retired U.S. Navy Admiral Harry Harris, a former U.S. ambassador to South Korea and a former head of U.S. Indo-Pacific Command. Speaking to reporters on Friday at an annual peace forum held on Jeju Island, he stressed that threats in the region from the likes of North Korea, China, or Russia are not isolated from each other.
Again, we have to look at them holistically. And I believe that if is the key word here, if there was a restructuring of some forces in Korea, ultimately it would serve to defend Korea better than it would not.
His comments come after the U.S. is reportedly considering withdrawing around 4,500 troops deployed to South Korea, and as the Trump administration will likely seek to renegotiate a deal on sharing costs for maintaining forces in Korea. Scott Snyder, the head of the Korea Economic Institute of America, who was also at the Jeju Forum, noted that there needs to be a broader discussion on this issue, including in areas such as technology and defense industrial production.
Honestly, I don't think that President Trump could get what he wanted from it last time in the first administration, and it basically failed to be used as a lever. But we have so many other ways that we're cooperating on defense issues in the world. And so there's a lot to be considered.
During his first term, Trump called for a whopping 5-fold increase in Seoul's contribution to maintaining U.S. troops. He will likely seek to renegotiate a deal on this once South Korea has a new president next week. With the Trump administration demanding that Seoul increase its share of defense costs, this issue remains as a crucial challenge for the next Korean government to overcome. Bae Eun-ji, Arirang News, Jeju.
Good morning, I'm Choi Ji-hee, and this is The World Now. Ukraine says it has completed its biggest drone operation within Russian territory, reportedly destroying over 40 military aircraft. On Sunday, June 1st, Ukraine's security service announced the successful execution of Operation Spider's Web, targeting multiple Russian air bases. The operation, which took around 18 months to plan, involved 117 drones. According to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, it damaged 34% of Russia's strategic cruise missile bombers. The attack caused approximately $7 billion in damage. Meanwhile, Russia also launched a significant drone and missile attack on Ukrainian territory overnight on the same day, killing 12 Ukrainian soldiers and injuring over 60 others. All this comes just before the planned second round of peace talks in Istanbul on Monday. Also in Russia, 2 bridges in regions bordering Ukraine collapsed over the weekend, killing at least 7 people and injuring dozens. Russian state media reported that the incidents are being investigated as potential acts of terrorism. On Saturday night, a bridge in Russia's Bryansk region collapsed onto a moving passenger train carrying over 300 people. 7 people were killed and more than 70 others were injured in the disaster. Hours later, early on Sunday, a second bridge collapsed in the neighboring Kursk region, derailing a cargo train and injuring the driver. Both the Bryansk and Kursk regions border Ukraine and have seen a surge in attacks on infrastructure since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Moscow's investigative committee has classified the collapses as terrorist acts. And the state-run Moscow Railways reported that the Bryansk bridge had been blown up in an illegal interference. However, Ukrainian officials have denied the involvement, accusing Russians of staging a false flag operation to manipulate international opinion ahead of the Istanbul negotiations. In Nigeria's Niger State, rescue operations continued over the weekend after at least 200 people died in flooding caused by torrential rain which hit on Thursday. Emergency services said 500 people were still missing and 3,000 residents were displaced in the market town of Mokwa in what is being described as the worst disaster in the area in 6 decades. The National Emergency Management Agency announced on Sunday that it had begun providing relief packages to people affected, and authorities will focus on recovering bodies to prevent potential outbreaks of disease. In the United States, a 16-year-old transgender athlete has secured 2 golds and 1 silver medal at the California Interscholastic Federation State Track and Field Championships, stirring up a controversy over the participation of transgender athletes in a girls' competition. The championships that involved A.B. Hernandez saw protests, with demonstrators displaying signs opposing transgender inclusion in girls' sports. President Donald Trump criticized California's decision to permit Hernandez's participation, threatening to withdraw federal funding from the state.
It's the first commute of June and rain is in the forecast. Wet clouds over the West Sea are moving inland, and starting from Jeju Island, rain will expand to the central western regions and Jeollado provinces this morning, then reach Gyeongsangdo area by the afternoon. And we are expecting some spotty rain for the capital area. Jeju Island could see up to 60 millimeters of showers through tomorrow. The rest of the southern provinces will be seeing 5 to 20 millimeters, but the capital area once again will be seeing some spotty rain, mostly in the morning hours. With the cloudy skies and rain, temperatures will not be climbing much, dropping by 2 to as much as 8 degrees, so we can look forward to some relief from yesterday's early summer heat. Seoul will be getting up to 23 degrees, Daegu topping out at 24 degrees Celsius from yesterday's 31 degrees heat. Then the Seoul metropolitan area will clear by this afternoon, the rain-wise, but for other regions, it will continue until tomorrow morning, which is the presidential election day.
That is all we have for this morning. Thanks for watching and have a wonderful start to the week.
가면
To always play it safe, so I don't get out often. I love a rainy day.
재밌다 이거. 글로벌 K컬처 세계 속에 꽃피우다. 2025 천안 K컬처 박람회.
How to survive in Korea. One room. So, you're surviving in Korea if you've signed a contract for a one room. Obviously, you're a pro. But the real deal begins now. Step 1. Housewarming. No need to buy toilet paper, diffusers or hand soap. You'll get them soon enough as housewarming gifts. And some are bound to pile up. There's nothing better to serve your guests than milpaeyu nabe. If you have Korean friends coming over, don't forget the extra garlic. Step 2. Garbage disposal. With great power comes great responsibility. You've had a good time, so let's get to work. It might be tempting to sweep everything into a trash can, but you have to separate your garbage. Not bothered? Beware that negligence is punished with a fine or public humiliation. Step 3. Drying rack. You're excited to live alone in Korea, but the fate of these items, hanger, storage, or a hanger. Go get fresh coffee outside. Jogging doesn't cost anything, and nothing beats instant rice. But keep one item around so that you don't get too lonely. Step 4. Pros of living alone. No mum. Cons of living alone. No mum. A new towel doesn't magically appear. You have to do the laundry regularly. If anyone gives a towel as a souvenir, take it. Get rid of mold immediately. Don't be lazy with the vacuum cleaner. Housework is an endless affair. Overwhelmed? Give your mum a call and thank her for everything she's done. Did you survive in your one room? Wait, you have an unwanted visitor. Call someone you fancy. Could be the right person for the job.
bring a new type of news show.
New insight, new style, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation. Bring news just for you. It's Monday, June 2nd, here in Seoul. I'm Song Yujin, and you're watching News Generation. Joining us today is Ki Kim.
Happy Monday.
Happy Monday and happy June.
Happy June, yes.
Yes, and Niall Song.
Happy Monday.
Happy Monday. Now, both are here to speak on behalf of those in their 20s and 30s. So Monday is when we zoom in on the issues that matter most to young people in Korea. Now, South Korea is just one day away from its 21st presidential election. After months of leadership vacuum, tomorrow, voters will head to the polls to decide who will lead the country for the next 5 years. So today on NewsGen, we're going to take a closer look at what our generation of voters is prioritizing as they prepare to cast their ballots. So starting off, Ki, can you give us a quick overview of this presidential election?
Sure. As you just said it, the 21st presidential election for the Republic of Korea is taking place on June 3rd, Tuesday, and that is tomorrow. And this is due to former president being impeached after his short-lived martial law imposition on December 3rd last year. Now, there are 5 candidates: Lee Jae-myung of Democratic Party, Kim Mun-so People Power Party, Lee Jun-seok of the Reform Party, Kwon Young-guk of the Democratic Labor Party, and Song Jin-ho running as independent candidates. Hwang Kyo-ahn, on the other hand, was running as an independent candidate, but then now he is supporting Kim, and he retired yesterday.
Right.
And overseas voting took place from May 28th to 25th across 223 polling stations in 118 countries, resulting in a record high turnout of 79.5%. And onboard voting, which was first introduced in 2012 for the 18th presidential election, which is for those Navy ships on extended missions, took place from 26th to 29th. And early voting took place on 29th and 30th with a turnout of 34.74%, marking the second highest early voting rate since the system was first introduced in 2014. Approximately 15.4 million out of 44.3 million eligible voters participated during the 2-day early voting period. So now we're looking for the main voting tomorrow.
Right. Only the big day, June 3rd, once again, is left, the actual election day. Now, as Ki just mentioned, for those unable to vote on the day itself, early voting was held over 2 days, which were last Thursday and Friday. So I want to ask our panelists, did either of you vote early, or are you planning to cast your vote tomorrow?
Well, I did early voting on Friday during the early voting period. And one of the things I prefer doing the early voting is that I can actually go to any voting station I want, whereas for the main voting, you actually have to go to the designated place, normally according to your currently registered address.
Right. For me, I am planning to go and vote before I come to work tomorrow. What about you, Niall?
I actually just have a morning show tomorrow morning, so right afterwards, I have a little leeway. I can wait in line, and I'll go vote tomorrow as well.
Okay. And to give you a bit more of a background on this presidential election, repeating what Ki mentioned, since former President Yoon Suk-yeol declared martial law last December, we've seen an incredible surge of political engagement among younger generations. We talked about this multiple times on NewsGen. We could see this active political engagement when young citizens went out to the streets, protesting, demonstrating. So in this sense, do we expect to see a strong voter turnout among young generation for this election? What would you say?
For sure. The MZers, especially those in their 20s, used to be relatively disengaged from politics for the past couple of decades. I'm not going to talk about our parents' generation who were actively involved, who fought to win this freedom and democracy here, but many felt disillusioned by the candidates or simply indifferent to the process, which was reflected in their consistently low voter turnout. But things have changed in the wake of events like the declaration of martial law and the presidential impeachment crisis. Young voters have come to recognize the weight of political participation. In fact, the percentage of people in their 20s who says they will definitely vote has increased by 9 percentage points compared to the last presidential election, which is a meaningful shift. And if you take a look at the screen now, according to the Money Today survey, those in their 20s who said they'll definitely vote were 66% last time, which I would say was relatively high, yet it jumped 9% this time to 75% for the 21st presidential election. Now, that signals a growing sense of civic responsibility among the youngest voters.
Yeah, and around 30% of the voters are in their 20s and 30s, and this is a huge number. This age group tends to have a high proportion of swing voters, which means there are frequent shifts when it comes to candidate support and depending on the situation. In contrast, people in their 40s, 60s, and 70s, there's only 10% of the voters who consider themselves to be unaffiliated. For the younger voters, people in their 20s, 36% consider themselves unaffiliated, and 28% of those in their 30s consider themselves unaffiliated. As a result, a lot of the president candidates actually target this demographic with memes, parodies, lots of creative ways to engage them, get them to join in the votes.
Right, and one of the major ways these presidential candidates are trying to win over the hearts of young voters is through their key policy areas. So we're now going to break down the key policy areas that young voters are paying close attention to and what the major presidential candidates are promising in those fields. So let's start with Yuki.
Yes, so it is clear that the MZ generation primarily focused on issues that directly affect their lives, like housing, employment, and the national pension system, for example. Now, take housing, for example. For many young people today, the idea of owning a home feels almost unrealistic, and I feel that too.
Right.
And to make matters worse, incidents like rental fraud have turned the housing crisis into a deeply personal issue for many, and it's no surprise that this has become a major point of concern among MZ voters. So in response, the Yeouido Democratic Party has pledged to expand policies for single-person households and young people. It promises to create integrated housing work platforms near workplaces, along with tailored public housing programs and rental subsidies for youth. Meanwhile, Kim Moon-soo of People Power Party put forward a plan to supply 200,000 homes annually, targeted at youth, newlyweds, and young families. His proposals also include establishing half-rent zones and expanding publicly supported rental housing. So both candidates are clearly trying to appeal to younger voters by addressing the core economic challenges they face every single day.
And before we move further, I just want to mention that the candidates whose pledges that we are introducing, they are the candidates from the two major parties, and they are the two candidates who are showing the strongest supporting rate in the polls leading up to today. Now, let's move on to another key policy area now.
Right. So as Kim mentioned, housing is a huge issue, and along with that, jobs remains a huge issue because for young people and the low economic growth has reduced the number of quality jobs, leading more youth to remain unemployed or inactive completely. And regarding youth unemployment, Lee Jae-myung promises to expand job-linked vocational training programs in partnership with global companies and increase job-seeking activity support allowances. And Kim Moon-soo proposes encouraging open recruitment for entry-level positions at large companies, supporting different types of startups, training 200,000 young professionals in AI and 100,000 in export and trade. So definitely going for more of the futuristic job markets and also establishing AI youth startup villages nationwide. In addition to all of this, Lee Jae-myung also proposed a 4.5-day work week, which has drawn interest from the younger generation, but it's still an ongoing debate because of its feasibility.
Right, and then we are going to move on to our last area of focus, which is also greatly related to the two key policy areas we've mentioned until now, which is financial stability, right, Ki?
Right, so financial stability, two major candidates, Lee Jae-myung, Kim Moon-soo, and also the third leading candidate, who's Lee Jun-seok of New Reform Party, have put their focus on helping young people build financial assets. So Lee Jae-myung proposed the introduction of a youth future savings plan, which includes measures to ease the burden of university tuition and expand eligibility for student loan interest exemptions. Kim Moon-soo, on his part, plans to broaden the age range for asset-building programs like incentive grant and opening a special account, initiatives designed to support young workers, along with expanding loans for those university students. Lee Jun-seok, meanwhile, is advocating for low-interest policy-based financial products, specifically tailored to the younger generations. So you can see all these three leading candidates recognize the urgency of helping youth achieve financial independence and long-term stability.
So a lot of promising campaign pledges made by the presidential candidates. Then as a voter yourself, I want to ask you, what policy issue matters to you most personally? And besides policy, what other qualities do you consider important when choosing a presidential candidate?
Well, just like anyone else, I have to consider a lot. Financial plan for my family, of course, education for my kids, and the economy as well for my career and as a broadcaster and for my own company. And one of the important things I really look for the future president this time is uniting the country. I guess it's a phenomenon that's taking place all over the world. So it doesn't have to be binary. You know, those who are not in your shoes or politically different ideas, different point of view are still the same citizens. So hopefully the new president can embrace the diversity and bring people together, regardless of their background or beliefs. What we need now, more than ever, is leadership that unites, not divides.
So you're prioritizing which presidential candidate could have the ability to unify the country.
Exactly.
Then what's at top of mind for you, Niall?
Well, I've been married for a while, but I'm still considered a newlywed according to the policies. So I'm looking out for a lot of the family-related policies. And now that I have a child and planning on having more, definitely whichever candidate is focusing on that. And when it comes to values, I suppose this may come off as a little idealistic, but a leader who can lead by example and somebody with integrity. It really seems difficult to be able to pursue something at whatever cost, but also do it with integrity. So that's what I value.
Right. So for Niall, it's policies related to family or child caring and also a leader who has integrity. Okay, so we're now going to find out what our viewers think. We asked your viewers the question on our Arirang News YouTube channel: what do you value most when voting for your country's next leader? If we look at the results, 45% answered election pledges, followed by personal values, and then political party affiliation and career background. Okay, so after the break, we'll invite a Korean millennial who's currently living in the United States to get her take on this election. Stay tuned.
NewsGen wants to hear from you. Go to YouTube and search our channel Arirang News. Click Community and leave a comment down below. Make a new type of news with us.
Joining us today is Korean millennial Lee Hyunju. Welcome, Hyunju, to the show.
Hello. Thank you for having me for the interview.
Thank you for joining us. So Hyunju, as our panelist Key mentioned, the overseas voting period ran from May 20th to 25th. So we want to ask you, were you able to cast your vote? And how would you describe the overall level of interest in this presidential election among Koreans who are living abroad?
Yes, I voted at San Jose polling station, which was the closest location from where I live. And from what I saw, there seemed to be strong interest in this election among Koreans living abroad. I went on Thursday morning, a weekday, but the line was already quite long and people of all ages were there to vote. And it really showed me that even overseas, many Koreans still care deeply about what's happening back home and want to take part in shaping future.
Okay, thank you. So this might be a personal question, but when choosing a presidential candidate, what do you personally prioritize and why is that?
In general, I tend to support candidates who can represent the voices that are often left out, those of marginalized or underrepresented communities. But for this particular election, what mattered most to me was whether the candidate has a genuine commitment to restoring political and economic stability after the chaos that followed the recent uprising. And this election was held unusually early, just 3 years after the last one, and that itself speaks to the level of instability. And I remember watching so many citizens take to the streets in freezing weather to demand change, and I felt a sense of regret that I couldn't do anything at the time. So now living abroad, I see voting as the one meaningful way I can support those people and contribute to rebuilding our country. That's why this time I focused on choosing a candidate who can bring real calm and direction to our society.
All right, Hyunju, so you just mentioned why this voting was so important to you and what it represented. So why do you think voting is especially important for young people, those of us who are out there?
I think voting is one of the most powerful ways we can choose the kind of future we want and select someone who will speak for us. For young people especially, the impact of today's political decision will last much longer, so it's even more important that we get involved now. And I also believe voting is one of the easiest and most effective ways to participate in politics, especially for young people who are often busy with studying, work, or trying to build their careers. Yes, that's why. And I want to say something like election day is just around the corner. So take a moment to think about what kind of future you want and cast your vote for the person who can help bring that future closer.
Very well said. All right, Hyunju, thank you so much for joining our show today. Hope you have a great start to a new week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So wrapping up our election special episode today, we're going to remind our viewers and also ourselves why it's so important to vote tomorrow, and also go over some things to keep in mind when we visit the voting stations.
Sure. So again, regardless of your political belief, voting is one of the fundamental rights of democracy and something that can change you, your family, and your life. So please do vote. And many now upload a post to tell you have actually exercised your rights and you voted. So that's also great. And some people do thumbs up or peace sign to show their political preference, which is okay, as this could be part of your campaign unless you are part of specific groups like public officers or military groups. You cannot take a photo of a ballot paper, and you're not supposed to damage the ballot paper, and you can't use any other stamp other than the ones that's installed within the voting booth. So please keep that in mind. Don't forget your identity with the pictures on it. And also now we'll tell you others to be reminded of.
Right. So before we get into the guidelines of what you should and shouldn't do, I personally think voting is actually promoting and protecting democracy. And people fought and people still are fighting in other parts of the world to protect their own rights to vote. And some of us, some of our people in the past have died for this right. So I think even out of respect for that and out of gratitude of being able to do so, we should definitely all go and vote. Whoever you choose to vote for, it should reflect your views, your values, not anybody else's but your own, and that is the right we've been given. Going back to what you should and should not do, please do not take pictures inside the building of where you're casting your vote. Do not take pictures of the ballots, as he mentioned, because your vote may not count. And lastly, there are these cute images online if you want to print those and stamp it so that you can show and raise awareness about voting. Yes, definitely do that. Be cute about it. And I guess that's the younger generation's way of doing it. That's encouraged. Just don't do the things that I've mentioned before.
Right. And once again, I'd like to emphasize that voting is our privilege, our right, and responsibility. And to give our voters who do have voting rights for this presidential election, the election will take place once again tomorrow, June 3rd, from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. at your designated voting station. And you can check your designated voting station at the National Election Commission's official website. And that's all we have for today. But NewsGen will be back tomorrow, not tomorrow, but Wednesday at 10:30 a.m. Korea time. We're taking tomorrow, Tuesday, off as it's election day, a temporary holiday here in South Korea. But please stay tuned to Arirang's special coverage of the 21st presidential election. Special thanks to Ki Kim.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Niall Song.
Thank you.
Thank you. And to our viewers, thank you for watching and hope you have a great start to a new week. We are News Generation.
Set the facts straight. Get Korea right. K-culture is sweeping the globe. K-pop,